In Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople, the Hagia Sofia looms across the city as a jewel of Turkey, and every year millions gather inside the building for many purposes: tourism, prayer, restoration, and research. Constantinople was one of the most important cities of the Middle Ages, alongside Baghdad and Paris. But let's take a closer look. Since 2020, Turkish President Erdogan reverted the Hagia Sofia from being a museum and is now an active mosque. This isn't the first time the Hagia Sofia was a mosque either. Between the time of Mehmed the Conqueror in the mid-15th century to Ataturk in the 1930s, the Hagia Sofia called Muslims to prayer. This is, well, modern history. But in reality, the Hagia Sofia throughout the Middle Ages was the church, and a glorified one at that. Here, we see a clash of civilizations already, between Byzantium and the Islamic world. But let's not forget the Catholics either. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade came to Constantinople and brought massive suffering to the city. This involved the Crusaders, especially Venetian, to steal holy and art relics from the Hagia Sophia. From the Sophia, we see more than ongoing political controversies about Turkish secularism and her Ottoman past. We see Islam, Orthodox Christianity, and the Catholic Church. I started by summarizing the history of the Hagia Sophia's status in a rather strange way. This is because I explained her history backwards. The three terms I used to classify medieval Europe, the Latin West, Byzantium, and the Islamic world, emerged in modernity centuries well after the fall of Constantinople. These are historical terms meant to assist the medievalists in understanding the many spheres shaping medieval Europe. Borders and empires may change, yes, but historians benefit from understanding these three spheres. I'll give a brief overview on each of the three spheres and articulate their importance to medieval Europe as well as modernity today. European history, after all, and the Middle Ages refuses to leave us. I'm Madeleine Rose-Jones, and I study history, literature, and culture. Welcome to Snowy Fictions. Before discovering the three different spheres of medieval Europe, it is important to recognise the following. 1. These three spheres are not the only influential forces within medieval Europe. We must also consider Norse and Viking religions, as well as Gnosticism and heresy. 2. All three spheres had influence outside of Europe. The best example is obviously the Islamic world. Whilst the Caliphate of Cordoba and later the Ottoman and Mongol empires illuminate aspects of Europe submissive to Islam, this doesn't tell the whole story of medieval Islam, which drew strength from the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. 3. The three-sphere theory is best shown through art. The Latin West, Byzantium, and the Islamic world all developed distinctive art styles, from Gothic cathedrals to the Islamic-based practices of calligraphy and the manuscript illuminations we love today. And finally, the three categories listed had internal diversity and disagreement. In the Byzantium section, you'll learn about the Byzantium Commonwealth theory, where Constantinople's influence lingered outside its actual political lines, with the examples being Georgia and Russia. That's why the three spheres are ultimately historical classifications and should not imply that medieval Europeans saw their world as being divided into three distinct parts. The Latin West namely consists of all of Western and Central Europe as well as Scandinavia. These areas in modernity would become known for Protestant and Catholic approaches to Christianity. But within a medieval context, the Latin West essentially means Catholic. Here you will find the typical motifs of the Middle Ages: Arthurian legend, stained glass in Gothic cathedrals, chivalry, kingship, the Pope, the universities, the Crusades, Romanesque architecture, and manuscript illuminations in Latin. The Latin West brings together English, French, Irish, German, Spanish, and Italian history together, but remember, within the Latin West, there are still internal wars and divisions. The Latin West also created the blueprint for common medievalism in modernity, with J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martin, and Umberto Eco taking much of their inspiration from cultures within the Latin West. It's almost too obvious to explain the Latin West's contribution to medieval Christendom, and to be frank, there is so much to discuss, especially as it pertains to the history of the Catholic Church. I will focus on the Crusades, which is rather distinct to the Latin West, although that doesn't mean Byzantium and the Islamic world didn't have their own methods of justifying warfare with theology and clerical authority. The Crusades, as understood by historians, are a series of military campaigns organised by the Latin West, particularly in the Middle East. But there were crusades within Europe, such as the so-called Cathar Crusade in southern France, or the Northern Crusades against the lasting pagan populations in the Baltic states. These crusades didn't just involve conflicts with the Islamic world, pagans or heretics. They also included conflicts with Byzantium, as there were many emerging differences in the First Crusade, and even in the Northern Crusades, where the Teutonic Knights attacked Russia. I opened this video with an image of Hagia Sofia, a jewel of Byzantium. But in AD 1204, the Crusaders sacked Constantinople and brought numerous art relics back to Venice, where they remain today. Interestingly, we can observe an overlap between Byzantine and art in the Latin West, with St. Mark's Basilica in Venice being a standout example, as well as numerous basilicas and cathedrals in Ravenna and Sicily. The Latin West is also significant for its urban history, as we notice the development of many cities today, such as Paris, Bologna, Prague, York, and Toledo. Medieval mapmaking meant a worldview oriented around Christianity, with designs and places taking inspiration from Jerusalem and the wider European environment. In terms of cartography, the Middle Ages is an exciting time in the Latin West, as we can look to the Hereford Mappa Mundi and Matthew Paris's Map of Britain. These may seem a bit dated today, but possess aesthetic merit and offer a good glimpse into the mindset shaping the Latin West. In modernity, the Latin West concept seems a bit obsolete. Due to the Protestant Reformation starting in 1517, the decline of Latin even at elite schools, and rising nationalism. But the Latin West does linger. In contemporary European politics, there remains divisions between Eastern and Western Europe. Germany is quite reminiscent of the Holy Roman Empire. Medieval heritage remains a cornerstone of England, Austria, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, whether in the context of the Catholic Church or something else. The Crusades are not forgotten either, nor is chivalry, the medieval universities, kingship, or the looming Gothic cathedrals. This is part of what it means to be Western, to be from the Latin West. Stretching over 1,000 years, Byzantium is a somewhat strange term used to describe the Eastern Roman Empire, whose capital was Constantinople, now Istanbul. The territories of the Byzantium Empire change over time, such is the nature of conquest and competition, but we can understand a clear presence of Asia Minor and Greece. The city of Constantinople was called a New Rome by Roman Emperor Constantine the Great in the 4th century AD, whilst the Western Roman Empire would fall in AD 476, the Byzantine Empire considered itself as the preservers of Roman civilization, and the people were therefore Romans. The key historical events shaping the Byzantine Empire include iconoclasm in the 7th and 8th centuries, engagements with the Seljuk Turks, the eventual conversion of Vladimir the Great and the Bulgars. The history of the Byzantines is one of contact. Nestled across the Bosphorus, The Eastern Roman Empire found herself sandwiched between the Islamic world and the Latin West. When Constantinople eventually fell in 1453 to Mehmed II and the Ottoman Empire, Byzantium was no more. These geopolitical vulnerabilities were always present, particularly in the 7th to 9th centuries AD, with Arab invaders, thus provoking the use of Greek fire. From an aesthetic standpoint, Byzantium is well known for her mosaics and frescoes, with Cappadocia and the Hagia Sofia being key examples, as well as the monasteries in central Greece. Other features include Greek manuscripts, sigils and seals, as well as the colour purple. Being known for Orthodox Christianity, Byzantium was also home to icon painting and general iconography, often depicting Christ and his mother, Mary. Byzantium here also includes Russia, Georgia, Serbia and Bulgaria, because whilst they are not strictly Byzantine throughout all of their history, they are in the wider sphere of Byzantine influence. The Russian historian Dmitry Obolensky describes this as the Byzantine Commonwealth, where within medieval Christendom, a vibrant inner world shared ideas, religion, art, language and culture from Constantinople to Novgorod. Here, a clear connection between Byzantium and Orthodox Christianity emerges. It's no wonder that the 4 countries previously listed, Russia, Georgia, Serbia and Bulgaria, show a deep presence of Orthodoxy today, as does Greece and Ukraine. That's why the medieval sphere classification is important, because we can observe these medieval communities shaping current realities. The late geopolitical realist and professor Samuel Huntington incorporated the idea of an orthodox unity within his thesis, The Clash of Civilizations, composed after the fall of the Soviet Union. He argued that people's cultural and religious identities would prove the main source of conflict in our contemporary era. Is he right, or is he wrong? Well, time will give us the answer. For now, we can understand the Byzantine Commonwealth's legacy as deriving strength from art, Orthodox Christianity, and the Greek language. Byzantium, and by extension, the Byzantine Commonwealth, have also been perceived as a barrier between the Latin West and the Islamic world. While it's not strictly true in every single instance, it's obvious the Islamic world, namely the Ottoman Empire, did conquer Anatolia and much of the Balkans in the late Middle Ages to early modernity. The barrier concept goes the other way too. The Crusaders from the Latin West could hardly enter the Levant or the Islamic world without dealing with Byzantium, which resulted in many fraught encounters between the Latin West and the Eastern Roman Empire. Such is the nature of the Middle Ages. Islam, in the context of medieval Europe, existed in the outskirts of Europe and across the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. Within Europe, we see Islam in 3 distinct areas: Spain and Portugal, with the Cordoba Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, with the Balkans and Anatolia, and of course, the Tatars and later Mongols in Ukraine, Russia, and the Caucasus. The degree in which these societies were Islamicized is certainly debated, and we shouldn't neglect the many campaigns made by Arabs and Muslims, broadly speaking, within medieval Christendom. Muslim forces also launched raids into Malta and Sicily in the early Middle Ages, and notably, we have Charles Martel and the Battle of Tours, with the former winning over the Umayyad Caliphate in AD 732. Islam and the threat of Islamicization shaped much of the internal politics of medieval Christendom. This conflict reached its most intense point in the High Middle Ages, when Pope Urban II called for a crusade to retake the Holy Land and to protect Christians persecuted by Islam. The Crusades would go on to determine much of Europe's internal politics and culture, with chivalric romance coming from Richard the Lionheart as an example. Yet, the Islamic world is really centered outside of Europe and in the Middle East, with a special emphasis on the countries now making up Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. This so-called Islamic Golden Age meant some cities, namely Baghdad and Cairo, became centers of learning, with a special emphasis on science and medicine. Cordoba is one of them too. Whilst this Spanish city was reconquered in the 13th century, Islam has certainly left a mark on southern Spain with the Alhambra and the Cordoba Mosque Cathedral. In regards to military history and that of conquest, the Islamic world came into close contact with Byzantium, and we have a scenario where the Seljuk Turks and the Ottomans conquer much of Anatolia. Areas like Konya, Turkey, known today for its madrasa, Rumi, and Sufism, happened on the edges of Europe and Asia. Close by, Cappadocia witnessed centuries of conflict between the Turkish Muslims and the Cappadocian Greeks. The Islamic world also followed many of the familiar tropes associated with the Middle Ages, particularly manuscripts, calligraphy, and miniatures. Persia has a particular reputation for her gorgeous manuscripts, and many can be seen in the Museum of Turkish and Islamic Art in Istanbul, Turkey. The conflicts between Islam and Christendom continue well into modernity, with the Ottoman Empire making significant gains in the 15th century, but eventually meeting fierce Catholic resistance in Malta and Vienna. Today, it's not uncommon for an online account to refer or joke about retaking Constantinople. The outrage across Europe about Turkish President Erdogan reverting the Hagia Sofia and the Kora Church back into mosques only adds fuel to this fire. Due to mass immigration, demographic changes, and terrorism within Europe, it's absolutely not uncommon for Europeans to perceive the Islamic world as a threat to their civilization. But this perception is not new to Europe. In the Middle Ages, the threat of Islam and Islamization loomed across Europe. That said, there are many positive comments I can make about Islam in a Western framework, even if the picture today looks dire. The West has produced excellent scholarship on the Middle East and North Africa, particularly in the field of ancient archaeology. Whilst dismissed as Orientalist in recent decades, the university system has provided many opportunities for archaeologists and historians to understand the Near East, whether in an ancient, medieval, or modern context. Westerners work alongside Middle Easterners, North Africans, and Central Asians, which is particularly great considering they may be in different countries. Also, there are many Westerners who take an interest in learning about Islamic countries and history. I started this video with the Hagia Sofia. Well, having been to Turkey myself, I certainly took an interest to the many Ottoman palaces, mosques, manuscripts, and bazaars. This wasn't done out of a hostile desire to hurt anyone. It's because I am genuinely interested in the Islamic world and the Middle Ages. And there are many Westerners who will happily agree about the wonders of medieval Baghdad and accept the Islamic Golden Age as an actual era worthy of study and our attention. I'm not here to moralize or to lecture you about religion and ethnicity in Europe. Unfortunately, many historians have done that, abusing their platforms and public trust in their way. But acknowledging current realities as well as the glimpses of light is important. At the very least, we must understand medieval Christendom as endlessly fascinating and with the capacity to surprise us. I made this video to not encourage you to pick a favourite out of the three, as the Islamic world, Byzantium, and the Latin West are all amazing and fascinating to learn about, in the context of not only world history, but also in Europe and in Eurasian contexts. Through understanding the ways they exist, grow, and interact in this context, we can certainly frame medieval Christendom, and therefore Europe today, as worthy of our eternal attention and focus. But back to you. Have you read any good books on medieval history? Comment below. I'd love to start a discussion on this and to read your thoughts. Subscribe for frequent videos on history, literature, and culture. I also have a blog, Snowy Fictions, and a mailing list, as well as publications linked below. I also teach creative writing on Skillshare. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.